Uh-oh. All right, there we drop for a second. I guess when you start recording, it does something different. So,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, we had to skip last week, but for this week, I know you want to talk about the Luke description of Luke chapter 12 about the
Hmm.
faithful but wise slave. I think that's a good one to discuss.
Yeah, it's an interesting verse, and well, it's interesting because, of course, the faithful and wise servant or slave is talked about in Matthew 24,
Mm-hmm.
and we knew that. But there is a parallel in Luke 12 that's a little bit different,
Yep.
because in fact it has four different fates for this servant. And so if we look at that, let's see, Luke chapter 12. Yeah, starting at verse 42. Here it is.
Uh-huh.
It says, "And the Lord said, who then is that faithful and wise steward, whom his master will make ruler over his household, to give them their portion of food in due season? Blessed is that servant when his master will when whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will make him ruler over all that he has." So that's number one. But number
Uh-huh.
two, if that servant says in his heart, "My master is delaying his coming," and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to eat and drink and be drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and in an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him in two, and appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. And so number three, and that servant who knew his master's will and did not prepare himself, or do according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. And then finally, but he who did not know, yet committed things deserving of stripes, shall be beaten with few. For everyone to whom much is given, from him much will be required, and to whom much has been committed, of him they will ask the more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, um, a few interesting points about that. First of all, that first one, um, it says, "Who is the faithful and wise steward?" So that's actually a different word from servant or slave.
Mm-hmm.
The word servant or slave is doulos, which means one who is bound to another either voluntarily or involuntarily. So, of course, voluntarily it would be a servant, involuntarily it would be a slave.
Right.
But the word oikonomos, which is translated steward, means a house manager.
Oh, right.
So, somebody of a bigger stature than just a servant. And in fact, it's the person in Luke 16 that Jesus is talking about when he told the parable of the unrighteous steward,
Mm-hmm.
the wise but unrighteous steward. It's that
Right.
same word. And when we get into, so the first one, the first outcome where the master finds the servant doing what he's supposed to do and doing according to the master's will, it says he will um, make him ruler over all that he has. That's what King James says. Well, because kathastami means to be appointed over an office. So
Right. Okay.
apparently will be given even a higher position than the one that he had as steward. And yeah, so there's a few words here that are important. When we look at, I didn't take a note on it, but the second outcome where it says he will be cut asunder
Uh-huh.
or cut in two, yeah, that's the term for being cut asunder. Um, Meaning basically, and some Bible scholars seem to think this means something else, but it means he's going to be cut in half.
Yeah.
He's going to die.
Okay.
And so where it says he will be a portion with the unbelievers, they say, oh, well, that must mean he's still alive, but I don't think that's necessarily the case, the way I see it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. That's 46. We was talking about them cutting in two.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 46. Right. And so then, go ahead.
No, no, no. Go ahead. I was
Oh, okay.
going to talk on that a little bit, but go ahead. You finish what you're saying.
Okay. So the other two, um, basically means really exactly what it says. They will be beaten, like you know, the way Jesus was beaten. Same word. Some of them with many, and some of them with few.
Yeah.
Those words actually mean many and few. Pretty much literally what it says. The interesting thing about the last two slaves is that the first one actually has two requirements to him. The first one, it just says doesn't do the master's will. The first one says he doesn't do he doesn't do the master's will, but also he doesn't prepare himself. Now that's interesting because the word hatoimazo, which is put here,
Uh-huh.
it means to make ready, to make a big preparation as for a feast or for lodging. But it's also connected to an ancient practice of building and making sure the road is level for a king. When the
Oh,
king
okay.
decides to make a journey, yeah,
Okay.
they apparently they actually built some of the ancient roads because the king decided he's going that way.
Mm.
That's where we get the king's highways.
Okay.
That's where
Okay.
they came from. Yeah,
That's where the term came from. Okay.
right. So the first slave who's going to be beaten a lot, he wasn't just supposed to do the master's will, but he was supposed to prepare himself
Okay.
in that way.
Okay.
And so
Huh.
obviously, yeah, that would be a lot of work. It wouldn't be just, you know, when it talks about making ready a feast or lodging, that's a lot of work.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
obviously, it's going to take quite a bit to prepare himself, is the idea.
Okay. So your view on those slaves is what? What's your interpretation?
Well, I think, first of all, I think Jesus was talking in general about every Christian, and what kind of person is the Christian going to end up being? Are they going to
Mm-hmm.
be the one who does the Lord's will? Are they going to not do it so much that they start hurting other Christians? Are they going to be ignorant of it and so just not do what they're supposed to do, or are they going to know what they're supposed to do but not do it?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And thing is, I'm similar on that. My interpretation is pretty much the same. And Jesus is in general talking about Christians.
Right.
And each individual Christian has a responsibility to fulfill his potential in reference to his relationship with God through Christ.
Hmm.
Okay, so here's what's kind of interesting too. I did some research on that some time ago about the faithful steward, and in Luke 16, that was the one where it goes into depth and it kind of explains some things.
Oh, really?
Just yeah, because it just explained things about what the steward was, and he he was a steward. He had a very high position
Hmm.
in the master's house. Now, but here's the thing about it. When you look in verse 3, no, or verse 2, where the master says, okay, well, look, I heard this stuff about you. Uh, hand in your stewardship. All right.
Hmm.
So, because
Yeah.
you got to get out my house. Verse 3 says, what am I to do, seeing that my master is taking the stewardship from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. Now, that's what's interesting is that when you have a high, I mean, just thinking about it, if you got a high position in a company, you've
Hmm.
developed skills, right? You get fired, those skills don't go away. You can go to another company. But in Jewish culture back then, the Jesus illustration here was perfect because if you lost a stewardship according to the culture, you became a social outcast. So it is a high
Oh.
position. So that's why he said, I'm can't beg and I can't dig. That's the only two jobs he can get. It's
Mm.
a beggar or a digger. So that was a big fall for him to do
Right.
that. So
Got it. Yeah.
so what he did was considering his culture, he made some practical things for himself to say, okay, well, look, let me cut yours in half and maybe you'll take me in just as something. I don't have to be a servant, but just as something to where I can win some favor with you.
Right.
Because he's going against being fired from that job made you a social outcast. And
Hmm.
that's amazing. that you could
Wow.
be up that high and you couldn't go somewhere else if you got fired. I mean, just think about the litany of things that could get you fired from the master's eyes. No matter if it was just or not, you could be a good servant, but then you get an accusation from a member of the family, and he's a hot-headed master. He's like, "Are you out?" Like, but I
Right.
didn't do anything. Now you got to go dig or beg.
I
Okay,
was,
so
I was kind of wondering that. I've wondered that before because it doesn't say whether the steward actually was guilty or not. At
right,
least I don't
exactly.
think it does. Yeah.
No, but I guess that's in that culture. He says is what is it? What is this I hear about you?
Mm-hmm.
Handing your account of your stewardship, for you can no longer manage the house. So I think Jesus was just making it plain. Yeah, you lost your stewardship because of poor management,
Right.
so in some way.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so that's why when you think about that, that was an apt illustration to
Yeah.
show the culture of what a faithful steward was and what he was supposed to do. So now, then it comes back to how do you interpret Luke chapter 12, considering what was in the mind of the listeners. Now, here's what's interesting to me. All right, when you go back to the context in 35, now
Uh,
look,
12:35.
12:35, yeah.
Okay.
So Jesus is saying, be dressed and ready to have your lamps burning, all these things. He says because he's talking about you don't know
Right.
when the master is coming. And look in verse 38. Here's the word. If he comes in the second and finds them ready, happy are they. Okay, but know this: if the householder had known at what time the thief would have come, he would not have let his house be broken into.
Mm-hmm.
You also keep ready, because an hour that you don't think it likely, the Son of Man is coming. Okay, so the
Right.
context is keep on the watch, right?
Right.
Now
Yeah.
check out
Definitely.
now check out Peter's question
Okay.
before Jesus asked his question. He says, "Lord," in 41, "are you telling this illustration just to us or also to everyone?" Now here's the kicker. Jesus doesn't answer his question directly. He answers his question with
Right.
a question about the faithful slave, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. But the context, again, still the context is keep on the watch. That's what he's saying. So Peter was like, "Is this for us?" As I guess his question is, this for us as your apostles, or is this for every Christian?
Mm-hmm.
All your disciples.
Right.
That we should be keeping on the watch because we don't know when you're coming. And so Jesus tells him then, all right, the faithful slave. Now here's the interesting thing. If you go back to Luke 13, I'm not Luke, Mark 13. Check this out.
Okay.
And then we'll go to Matthew 24 at verse 32.
Mm-hmm.
Now Jesus goes back and he says, concerning the day of the hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but the Father. Now he's saying, again, he's talking to his disciples. He's saying, keep looking, keep awake, for you do not know when the appointed time is, right? So he
Right.
gives another illustration. But remember Peter's question, Lord, are you saying this to us or to everyone, right?
Uh-huh.
37.
37. And what I say to you, I say to all. Watch.
Yeah. Keep on
And
the
that's
watch. Right. Yeah.
that's the answer. He
So
was
so
talking to
there's the
everybody.
answer. That's the answer. Because Mark's account here is actually Peter's account.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. So he now Peter knows he answered my question. From when we were talking a couple of years ago, I asked that question. He said, keep on the watch. But yeah, it wasn't just for us, it's for all Christians. So that I thought that was pretty interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
here in Mark 13, it's a short account of Matthew 24. But now, if you go back to Matthew 24, it's the same context. It's just more 24,
Right.
36.
Okay.
So in 36, it says, concerning that day and hour, nobody knows, neither the angels of the heavens nor the Son, but only the Father. Okay, so
Hmm.
there again, we're still talking about the same context that was in Mark chapter 13, and the context in verse 42, he says, "Keep on the watch, therefore, because you do not know on what day your Lord is coming."
Hmm.
Okay, and then verse 44, he says, "On this account, you too prove yourselves ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not think it to be."
Hmm.
That now he goes back into his context about the faithful and discreet slave. All right, he goes back into that. So the thing is that that's why I say it's an illustration. It is
Right.
not, and again, so it's all about how a person would interpret that verse. And
Hmm.
saying that chapter 24, I think you and I have talked about this, but chapter 24 is one of these verses. Again, it depends on how someone's going to interpret it.
Hmm.
And each person can determine how they want to interpret it. To say that chapter 24 is talking about this time period that we live in, I don't see that, because that's not the question that was asked.
Hmm. Right.
Okay. They asked him, when is the destruction of the temple? And then what's the sign of your return and of the end of the age? And
Hmm.
so grammatically, the end of the age and the sign of his return or his presence is one event, one simultaneous event. It's not separate events.
Right.
So now if you look, then if you read from verse 4 down to verse 22 and really to verse 28, this is all in answer to their first question. When is the temple going to be destroyed?
Hmm.
Okay. So you know how, so I did part where you don't hear wars and reports of wars. People going to come in my name and mislead many, and nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. To say
Right.
that's this time period that we live in, starting in 1914 when the World War One started and all that other stuff. Well, that's an interpretation, but that's not what they asked Jesus.
Right.
So when what Jesus was answering was a time period that they were in right then. That's what he asked.
Right.
When is the temple going to be destroyed?
Yeah, and all these signs do fit into the 60s CE. The
Hmm.
there were actually more earthquakes I found out that
Yep.
decade, and of course there were reports of war because everything was coming to a head between Judea and the Romans at
Right.
that point. Yeah,
Exactly. So with that wasn't Titus, who was that, Vespasian? I can't remember. That came in
sounds right.
66. In verse 15, he's saying that, okay, now let's go to what Daniel said. So Jesus is explaining that. So if it's the interpretation from Daniel, Jesus is giving them what's the fulfilled prophecy from Daniel, then it can't be from any other time period.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, so it's just for then. You can't say, okay, it was for that time and this time. Like, no, that makes no sense. You
Right. And
can't
this
have it
is
both ways.
and this is probably for another video, but you and I had talked earlier about and basically concluded that the book of Daniel, refers to everything up until the Jesus time.
Yeah,
You
right,
know, whereas some people think it happens in the future. Well,
right,
some of it's
exactly.
happening in the future, but as far, yeah, well, from what we can tell, it all happened before Christ came.
Yeah, it was leading up
Hmm.
to Christ. So that whole king of the north, king of the south was really just about, pretty much for the most part, the Grecian Empire. I mean, some in
Greece
there.
versus Syria, yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
or
See,
Syria,
so
right, yeah,
because when
or
Greece
Egypt
broke up,
versus Syria, right.
yeah, because when Greece broke up after Alexander, that's
Hmm.
pretty much that time period that the king of the north and king of the south is talking about, and so that was leading up to when the Christ would appear, and that's why people were on the lookout for when
Right,
Christ would appear.
and which all of which makes sense to the point of view of the ancient Jew because they're waiting for Christ. For
Yeah,
them, that is an end in itself. So much so that everybody thinks once Christ comes, the end's going to come.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Because even Jesus' apostles believe that. So yeah, for them, the way they saw Daniel, everything had been fulfilled. It was time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. See,
Right.
so there was plenty of information, with the 70 weeks and all of that. There was plenty of
Right.
information for them to understand.
Hmm.
to look for the time of the Christ. But then you also had those ups and downs from the king of the north and the king of the south that would be affecting them. So yeah, Daniel was for the Jews. Again, my opinion. I mean, I think we share the same. Daniel was for the Jews to know that God would still be with them from the time period of the end of the writings
Hmm.
until until Christ.
Right.
So they were able to return to um, Jerusalem and the grounds and rebuild up until the Christ will return. God will still be with them.
Right.
So, so yeah, like I said, it's all dependent upon your interpretation. But the
Right.
thing is, you got the power to interpret it yourself, so, which is kind of our central theme with us. No religion has more power to interpret than we do.
Right.
It's just
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, it's the one you choose.
And if you go in with no preconceived ideas
Yeah,
and see what it really says for itself,
right.
you know. And in fact, that's kind of what happened with the ancient Jews. Like I says, they read Daniel and had ideas of their own, which they decided to support with Daniel.
Uh huh.
Because it never
Mm-hmm.
occurred to any of them, apparently, that, I mean, they understood that it was time for the Messiah to appear, but it never occurred to them that time and history were going to keep going after that.
Exactly. Yeah, and things weren't going to be what they expected it to
Right.
be.
They
You
expected him
know.
to bring a golden age with him, right?
Yeah, and in
Right
Roman
away.
domination. Yeah.
Right.
So it's kind of funny. I heard one commentator, not a commentator, I don't know what he was, but anyway, he was saying, which was interesting. He was saying that Christians and Jews kind of share the same view. It's just that Jews believe it's going to be them ruling with the Messiah, and Christians believe it's going to be them ruling with the Messiah. so, so it's kind of the
Yeah,
same
that's a
thing,
point. Yeah.
and that's what they thought back in the first century. That's what they thought when the Messiah's come. He's going to start this golden age, his rulership. We're going to be ruling right with him,
Right.
and so
Yeah.
Christians think, well, we're going to be ruling with Christ in heaven. All right, so. So, I mean, it's very broad to say
Right.
that, but I'm just saying we
Which,
could look and see how that works.
and, I was thinking when you talked about Peter asking, are you talking to them or are you talking to us or to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And it occurred to me that that could once again have been Peter's, we'll call it his ambition, because the
Mm-hmm.
apostles always were arguing over who was the greatest and thought they were. But when you put it in that context, really it's not so much, it's maybe not so much that they were ambitious. They must have been humble men or Christ wouldn't have picked them in the first place. But also the fact that the way they've been taught and the way they're thinking, okay, we're following the Messiah, we're his 12 closest men, it's our God-given right
Yep.
to be these
Mm-hmm.
rulers.
Right. Yeah, they were still thinking rulership,
Right.
a position of rulership, and that's not where Jesus was going with them. So,
Hmm.
so that's a good point. Then that would set them right for him to come and say who really is a faithful and discreet slave, or a faithful and wise slave, back then to let them know. Well, if you want to look at it like that, coming from your viewpoint, you still got that viewpoint. I understand that, but if you want to come from that point, remember you on a razor's edge. Then, just like any other
Yeah.
steward. It's you make a mistake. I come and look at your the books from your rulership, then I'll cut you in two, or I'll kick you out. Like, oh,
Right.
well, wait a minute, that's putting something on my mind. And then he comes back a couple of years later, and says the same thing. Oh, okay, now do you get it? Who really is? Keep on the watch. You don't know when I'm coming. So who really is the faithful slave? So saying to them, when I leave, get on your job and care for your brothers, your
Hmm.
Christian brothers.
And I think too with the wicked slave, like I said, many Bible commentators seem to think that means the slave is still alive when it says a portion with the evildoers. What it sounds like to me is, first of all, the master kills the steward, but then also he blots his name, so that
Mm,
he's remembered forever as having been wicked. I mean, when somebody dies, they're not necessarily, most people are remembered well after they died. Even the bad things they do, people forget about and tend to think about the good.
right.
But in this case, the master is going to make sure everybody knows this was a wicked man.
Yeah. 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 And really, because even in I guess there's several scriptures where he talks about the discipline that a slave is going to get. A Christian, so they will be exposed to humiliation. So
Yeah.
if it's that he's going to kill them or he's going to expose them, those who may thought they were leaders or something to that effect. We don't really know, but he does let you know that there's going to be some consequence. He will
Right.
hold you accountable, and it could be, when upon his return, the rapture, as it's called, that he's letting folks know, no, I didn't approve of this one.
Yeah.
So
I mean, he
he's,
clearly says that's going to happen too in
yep,
Matthew 7.
yeah, right, that's true,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
He
saying to
actually
me, Lord,
says
Lord, yeah,
they're going to say, "Lord, we did this and that." It's going to
hmm,
say you were never mine.
yeah,
Get away from me.
that's right. You did a lot of illegal stuff. So
Yeah, really.
yeah, so that's good. That's good. Discuss this about that, about the faithful slave, a
Hmm.
faithful and discreet slave, because we have to see what is our responsibility as a Christian. Do we just submit to someone else as to have authority over us? Is that what Jesus was saying, or was he saying that there will actually be, in a particular time period of interpretation, that there's going to be a faithful and discreet slave, or was he saying no? Each person who says they're a Christian has to get on their horse and do what's apportioned to them
Right.
within their ability as a Christian. Everyone has a responsibility. So if it's like just what we're doing now, putting things out like this, or working with our families, or whatever the case may be,
Hmm.
depending on how much He blesses you, blesses each one of us, will determine the extent that we should go in reference to understanding His words, and then following through.
Yeah, and if we consider the fourth the fourth outcome for the slave, where he was ignorant and didn't do his master's will and then got beaten. I mean, I meet Christians like that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
There are
Mm-hmm.
plenty of people who just believe that Jesus died, resurrected, and that's as Christian as they get. I mean, they
Yeah.
try and behave themselves, but other than that, they don't really know the will of God. So it could very well be that they fit into that fourth class. You
Exactly.
know, they'll be acceptable, but they're going to have to be disciplined,
Yeah.
basically.
And then he talks more about it in chapter 25
Okay.
of Matthew. I mean, just giving more illustrations about, like, with the talents.
Oh yeah.
And then
Right.
then the one who's lazy, like, oh yeah, I believe you, the Lord, but I buried it in the yard.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
wasn't even gonna take it to a bank. I wasn't gonna do nothing with it. So, oh, okay, we want to do it that way. So I think that's what it is referenced to, is the illustrations in Matthew 24. Again, going from 24:36 up to 25:33 or 25:30, he's talking about Christians,
Hmm.
those who profess to be Christians. These are illustrations for you to think upon what you're supposed to do once I leave. But I'm alive in the heavens. I'm watching,
Hmm.
and I'm blessing your efforts. Or if you're not doing anything, I'm still watching, and then I'm going to require an accounting of you at some point.
Right.
So just because you die and I haven't returned yet, I do have the power of resurrection. So I can bring you back and let you know, or right before you die, I can let you know,
Yeah, that's
what
true.
you've done and how I view this. So yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it for anybody. It's not just that someone has authority over you as a Christian.
Yeah, and I think that's a big problem with a lot of groups. I mean, especially the one we came out of, is that there are certain things that are thought of as prophecy, like they prophesy a certain group, when
Hmm.
in fact it's just about life in general or Christianity in general.
Right.
We kind of said the same thing about the wise and foolish virgins, because we
Yeah.
tried to yeah we tried to see, is there a group that represents these two groups of virgins right now. And I think, I don't know if you remember, you and I basically
Yeah.
concluded
We
that
discussed
no,
that.
this is personal. This is for
Exactly.
each person, and how do they have oil at the end when they finally are ready to die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like that we can discuss those things. Just say our point of view, and no one has the authority to say, no, you have to view it this way.
Right.
You have to believe this way. But when you're in a religion, for the most part, you have to accept their interpretation of
Hmm.
the thing. So yeah, but Jesus' relationship. I mean, just from the basic Jesus relationships with his disciples was individual relationships. So
Yes.
it was, and it's still the same way with your relationship with God through Christ. It's individual, just a three in that relationship. So no one can make the determination where you stand with it with God. However, we can't look at your act and say, well, I don't want to be around you. I don't like your
Right.
lifestyle or your morals or whatever the case may be. It's my personal choice. But where you stand with God, yeah, he can judge you to that extent, but I also can judge whether I want to be around you or I want you around my family or not,
Yeah,
just on how
this is
you act.
true.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and everybody has to make that choice
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
themselves.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, but in them years, the people were talking about, oh, well, you're judging. Yep, sure am. I do judge that, I definitely judge. So I have to make determination for me and my family.
Well, and Paul said, "Do you not judge those on the inside?"
Yeah, that's right.
So the idea then being, if somebody claims to be a Christian but they don't live up to your standard, I mean,
Yep.
not some arbitrary standard, but what you really believe in or living up to yourself, then yeah, you have the right to say, "I don't want you around."
Yeah, and even the collective group had the right to decide if they wanted someone around.
Yeah, this
See,
is
so
true. Right.
yeah, see, so
Yeah.
you got a small group of Christians. Now, don't come around us. You live in that way.
Right.
you don't tell anybody that you're a Christian. Don't even come around the way you live it. So that's what he was saying. You judge those on the inside.
Right.
And that's absolutely appropriate because then you're just going to allow anything to come in. Like, well, no, we don't
Yeah.
want you associating with us. Don't claim to be with us. That's all. And that was the group's decision.
Right.
But they had to look at what the scriptures said in terms of lifestyle and how
Hmm.
you live as a Christian. So yeah, Jesus just for you take example, Jesus said, God created them man and woman, and that's it. There you go. Two
Hmm.
genders. So God created man and woman. They can procreate and create more life.
Hmm.
There's the standard. So we understand that. That
Right.
was just
Yeah.
the thing. But yeah, yeah. I like that. For us as Christians to make our own determinations about things based on the scriptures, not surrendering that to someone who claims that they're a higher authority. I'm like, no, you're not.
Hmm.
So I think that kind of brings things to a conclusion on the faithful slave and whatnot.
Yeah, that's kind of a smaller topic, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but it's actually a good topic.
Hmm.
It's a really good topic. We've got some other ones that we can a few other ones that are bigger topics, but I'm glad you brought that up because I think that needed to
Hmm.
be clarified uh, for us and anyone who listens. To look at the scriptures, see what it says, to remove that authority that someone has over you and the after effects. So if you were part of a religion we used to be part of, okay, it's going to have after effects even if you leave because it shaped your worldview, especially if you were raised in it. But now to know that it's just between you, Christ, and God, they had no authority.
Hmm.
Now, and if you were within any other religion and Christ led you out, that's kind of interesting too. That Christ led you out. Now you're free. You have your Christian freedom. I was reading. Someone retweeted something from this guy, and I had to go ahead and respond to that retweet. And it was talking about the guy made a comment that for those ones like ourselves who say you're a Christian, but you don't need the religion. You don't need a religion.
Hmm.
And he made something in reference to, you can't do it alone. So I
Yeah.
sent my comment back. I said, yeah, well, John 14:6 says this. I just quoted it. I said, so where does that religion fit in? I was just he hasn't responded. It's because it's older. It was a tweet from a couple
Yeah.
months ago. I just happened to see it. But no one, he didn't respond to it or hasn't responded yet. But that's it. Is that people have these ideas that we need the religion, and then they come up with their own ideas as to why we need them. And it's like that. It's not what the scripture says. You
Well,
know
and how about the fact that the Gospel of John was written while John was physically isolated from other people?
exactly, exactly. And but Christ was still with him because he
Right.
wouldn't be
He
able to write
wasn't alone.
Revelation. That's right.
Yeah.
so that's right. So that's a
Hmm.
really good point. But those are things that we. on the lookout for. And I just hope that anyone who listens can be able to settle within themselves to say, no, my relationship with God is through Christ,
Hmm.
and I'll work it out from there.
Yeah, and he may have been making the point because there are a lot of people who are a certain way where they're, they're not religious, they're spiritual,
Yeah, yeah,
you
and that's
know.
what he was saying that. Yeah,
Right. And there is a lot of that, but that's for some people that means that they're basically they don't want to go to church, maybe they're just lazy,
hmm
But um yeah, there is a difference, I think, between somebody just saying I'm not going to do that and somebody saying, well, I don't need to do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right. So there's something I did want to discuss next time. Uh, it's about the kingdom of God, what it is. We don't have
Oh,
to
okay.
get into a lot of depth into it, but just because it's pretty deep topic, we can just stay on the light stuff for the time being. Nothing we can cover in an
Yeah.
hour. But what is the kingdom of God?
Right.
I
Okay.
think that would be a real good one to discuss.
Okay. Yeah, there's
All right.
a lot to look into on that, but yeah, we'll do
Oh,
that.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. There's a whole lot on that one. So,
Right.
all right.
Okay.
Well, you got anything else?
That's all I've got on that topic.
All right. That's all I had. So
Okay.
I will talk to you, well, this week, at
Yeah,
some
we'll
point
talk.
this week. All right.
Okay.
I have a good one, Nick.
All right, Rick. See
All
you.
right.